Hey everyone, it's Michael GoosebumpsFan. Today I have another thing like Goosebumps to talk about. This is another creepypasta that I read yesterday slash today. I finished reading it today and it was kind of a mess, kind of a big disappointment, honestly. Now, the original title for the first ever post, before it became a series of six different, I guess six posts, five posts, something like that, five or six different posts that all string into one big overarching ARG type story, which is an alternate reality game. A lot of people didn't know that's what it was at the time. I think it seems kind of obvious. It's relatively old, too. It's an older game that somebody had set up on Reddit, in a subreddit called No Sleep, where pretty much all creepypastas began and kind of thrived for the longest amount of time, and still they typically do. This original first post was called "I'm a grown logical man crying tears of horror right now." The actual series title, I guess, is called "The Story of Her Holding an Orange," according to the title of the first post that's kind of updated. This creepypasta, of course, these are short stories, basically, very short stories. Like the 5 or 6 posts for this particular story is essentially just kind of short, again, ARG type stuff. Like they're pretending that the writer of this story is telling a real story about some weird stuff, man. And if you're a fan of Goosebumps, I think you would like this. Just like I think you would like creepypasta in general. Because it seems like it's kind of a series type thing, but again, not as lengthy as a typical Goosebumps novel or anything like that. But I do think people who are fans of Goosebumps, people especially that are my age, that are a little bit more grown up, the 20-somethings like myself, maybe the 30-somethings who are a little bit older than myself, I think you guys would all like creepypasta in general, depending on what part of it that we're talking about, because a lot of it's just crap, and some of it's not. And this one started out really great in the first post, and kind of the second post too, and then it lost steam real quick by the time you got to the third post, and it just kept going on and on and on. I'll get more into that in a moment, not spoiler-fied, or spoiler-filled, or anything like that, but I will talk about enough things to kind of give you an essence of what I didn't like about this one after a while. Again, the first post and the second post were fantastic. This is written by a user on Reddit. About 7 years ago was the first post. INAAACE. Inace? I guess? I don't know what to call this person's name. I wish it was like the previous story I did, Candle Cove, which is the first creepypasta I've reviewed on the channel. That was written by a person named Chris Stroud, and it was fantastic. One of my favorite things I've ever read. Pretty much the first creepypasta I've ever read as far as I know. And again, these creepypastas, for anybody who doesn't know, are just kind of short horror stories. Now, the premise for this one was really spooky. And again, the first post is I would say the first 3 or 4 or 5 posts, whatever the length of this is, they're pretty lengthy. You know, I would say they're pretty long posts, lots of paragraphs, lots of stuff to read. The first post of this is actually very, very creepy. I think it gets under my skin very well, and it really set the tone for what this could have been. And as an ARG, it kind of lost its steam, again, on like the third post of the franchise stories, whatever, series. It had a cool mystery that kind of hung out throughout the whole thing. It was interesting to speculate, but to me, I didn't think it was as good, except for the first post, really. Essentially, a young man, well, there's an older guy, and he's talking about something that he encountered recently that ties back to something that's been happening throughout his life. And it's fascinating. I absolutely love the lore and the setup for this character. Not that you get to know him on a personal level, like what his favorite color is or anything like that, but more in the sense of, you know, he lives with his girlfriend, he has all this different stuff happening in his life, and he talks about how a long time ago when he was 17 years old, his mom had a friend named Rose, and Rose would come over and talk with his mom just for hours, just sitting on the porch and gossiping and drinking tea and all kinds of stuff. And one day he happened to be out there when the two were talking. The mom went inside, and Rose and the 17-year-old boy were just kind of hanging out outside by themselves. And she leaned forward and got this really creepy grin on her face, kind of tilted her head a little bit, and pulled out an orange from inside of her purse and held it out, but not to him, just kind of held it out in general, like, look at this, you know? And she looked at him and said in a child's voice, not a woman, grown adult voice like she was like 30 or 40 looking, pretty woman, apparently, according to the post, and she looks at him and says, you know, take this, or, you know, you should come with me, or are you ready to go? Something like, I think it was, are you ready to go, was what she actually said the first time she spoke to him. And immediately, dude, I got chills when I read that story, when I was reading it at work yesterday. I don't know what it was with the way it was written, Because again, this is written to be just like a regular Reddit user, or not even that, like more of like the uneducated Reddit user who just kind of types without punctuation and messes up sentences, no commas or anything like that used appropriately, capitalizations out the window, all that kind of stuff. It's typical with a lot of creepypasta that's written by really big amateurs, and that's fine for the most part, because here it works as a character development for this guy telling the story. It makes it feel a little bit more realistic, honestly. And essentially, this kid, like, the mom comes back outside, and Rose, the woman, puts the orange back in her purse, and throughout this man's life, he possibly has been encountering this Rose woman. And then some other things happen when the second post comes around, and towards the end of the first post, he talks more about how it ties into now when he's like 30 or 40 or whatever he is at this point. I think he's like 25 or 30 at the point of the first post's end, where he's telling like what recently happened to him. It's very fascinating. But again, I love this spookiness of that first post. It just has this very weird, eerie vagueness to it that really works in a lot of ways. And then it kind of gets ruined when you get to the second post, and it tells from a different person's perspective, but the main character guy is telling you what this person experienced. And then eventually it blossoms out into like a whole thing that I'm like, we didn't need to go that far. This was not good enough to be that widespread, you know? And don't even get me started on the ending of the story, right? I'm not going to spoil it, once again, like I said, but if you read this whole thing, I loved the first post, and I liked the second post. From that point on, it ruins it, and it's not as fun. The ending is absolutely stupid. Just stupid. Awful. I don't recommend reading past the first post. Maybe past the second post, if you're curious enough. At one point, the user that's typing all these stories, or whatever you want to call them, when he's typing them up, I think it's like the third post or the fourth post, he actually posts pictures of something that he found in a very weird situation. That was interesting. I was interested in some of the photos. I kind of figured it'd be like a GIF and something would shoot out and jump out at me and I'd have a heart attack while I'm reading creepypasta. That did not happen, so don't be paranoid if you click on any of the picture link things that are posted in the articles if you read through them. But again, this was just not that great. It kind of let me down in a lot of ways, especially after that first post, and even the second post were really, really eerie. I just had a great atmosphere to them. At one point, there's a story post thing kind of focused on a biking trail, and that was good, but it should have been its own thing, like a complete different entity that had nothing to do with this storyline, because it would have worked a lot better, because it was cool and it was interesting. I don't think it should have been here, though. It had this... It didn't feel like it felt into the puzzle, or like it fit into the puzzle is what I meant. It felt into the puzzle, whatever that means. But what are your thoughts on this particular creepypasta? If you have read it, I don't really recommend it. I really don't. It's not all that great. It starts out really good, and it just gets ruined, honestly. And even by the end, you really don't have the answers to anything, and it's a slap in the face, in my opinion. That's one thing I hate about creepypasta. Again, I'm not saying that this person's an amateur writer, but there are many amateur writers out there who write just bad stories in general. Either they're filled with gore or filled with violence and language that don't really amount to anything spooky or creepy, which is fine. I mean, that's their thing, but for me, there's not really a whole lot of substance, I guess, is what I want to say, or experience, even. You can tell an amateur creepypasta writer from somebody who's been writing for a long time on the side, not professionally, and publishing fan fiction and stuff and doing some good creepypastas. You can tell, like with Candle Cove. Candle Cove is fantastic. I still stand by that. But again, when it comes to the story of her holding an orange, it starts out so good, and it just completely craps itself as it goes along. If I had to rate the story on a 5-star basis, I'd give it like a 2 out of 5, but it's kind of like a high 2 out of 5, if that's worth saying, because the first 2 posts were really, really good. The biking trail thing I talked about was really, really good. Other than that, not so good. Not so good, and the ending just... it's terrible. Anyway, what are your thoughts on this story? If you have read this particular creepypasta, I would love to hear your thoughts down below. Let me know. I'd love to hear what you have to say. I love hearing people's opinions about creepypasta, specifically when people are actually interested in this stuff like I am. But anyway, if you have any creepypasta stories you'd like to recommend to me for me to review here on the channel, I'd love to hear those thoughts from you too. Give me some, ideas. You don't have to link them. Just let me know the titles and I'll totally go looking for them. And anyway, thank you for watching, folks. May the Lord Jesus Christ bless you guys today, and goodbye.